Welcome to the complete animation of Ellie from Blue Sky Studios' Ice Age the Meltdown. So this is a Patreon request video because on my Patreon, if you pledge $20 or more a month, then I will make a complete animation video of the patron's choice. And this patron really wanted me to make a video for Ellie. So here I go. Now, Ice Age the Meltdown is the first of the Ice Age sequels. And I've said it before in other videos, but I think it bears repeating here that Ice Age, the first one, doesn't really have any sequels that sort of follow up with the major themes of that movie. These sequels, they feel like they are very different in tone, in just about everything. It's like they made a brand new continuity for the sequels, and then all the sequels from The Meltdown to Dawn of the Dinosaurs to Continental Drift to Collision Course. All of those are their own thing, and they don't really have much to do with the first Ice Age. And I'm all right with that. I really like the first Ice Age, and it doesn't seem like there's much of any real good way to follow that up. And so I think that they did an all right job with following it up with by throwing away everything except for the characters and general aesthetics of the first Ice Age when they started the sequel. Now, The Meltdown is interesting for me because this is one of the movies that I started out not really liking. I never saw it in theaters, and I had only seen like bits and pieces of it before. Like, I remember I went to the orthodontist's office and they were playing just a DVD of Ice Age the Meltdown in the waiting room. And I saw a bit of it there. So I never actually saw the entire movie until I was working one fall helping clean the mud and dirt from the undercarriages of firefighting vehicles in Wyoming. It's a really crazy story of why I was there, but I was. And while I was there, I slept in the back of my car while working. And while I was in the back of my car, I watched some movies on my phone. And one of those movies was Ice Age the Meltdown. And I didn't think that the movie was very good. And I maintained that opinion for a few years. But then just a few years ago, I watched the movie again. And I was watching it on a good TV with a decent soundbar. And I had the Blu-ray copy of it. And I watched the movie, and wouldn't you know it, I actually liked it. And I've had that same story happen before. I tried watching The Secret of Nim and The Last Unicorn on a tablet. Didn't really like those movies, but then I watched them again on a proper TV. And now I think those movies are great. And I think that just goes to show that, at least for me, I need to watch movies in a high quality way in order to have a high quality opinion of the movie. Watching it, I don't like watching movies on little screens anymore. But I do have some issues with Ice Age the Meltdown. I feel like the villain characters, they don't really do too much, and I feel like they're not developed enough as characters. They're more just like forces of nature with a face on them, but there's already a giant force of nature with a face on it, and that's all the melting ice. And yeah, I just don't think that those two like prehistoric fish characters, I don't really like them. Nothing explicitly wrong with them. They just rub me the wrong way. And I also don't really like Crash and Eddie in this story. Crash and Eddie are such interesting characters because we already have Sid. Sid is, the absolute idiotic slapstick, klutz of a character. Did we really need two more characters who fit into the dumb niche in this movie? And I don't think we really did. And I think that this is their weakest movie. I think that Crash and Eddie, like, there is a very fine line that writers have to take in order to make characters like Crash and Eddie work for me. And this movie missed the mark most of the time. It wasn't until the next movie, Ice Age Dawn of the Dinosaurs, that I feel like Crash and Eddie found their footing and how to be enjoyable in the story. And I think that the Ice Age series is weird. There are a bunch of people who think, oh, because it has 5 theatrical features, it must be overplayed and have no value to it. But I try to have a more nuanced opinion on this movie and all the other movies in the franchise. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of them, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. And in fact, I actually like them. All of them. In fact, I'm one of the few people who doesn't think that the Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild, the low-budget, straight-to-streaming movie that came out a few years back, I'm one of the few people that doesn't think that that movie is an irredeemable piece of trash. I think that it actually has some merit to it. Now, I will say that it is probably the weakest entry in the entire series, but I don't think it's all that bad. And just recently, it was announced that a 6th Ice Age movie is being made. And from the way that you saw the announcement of it, you can tell that they announced it as soon as the deal was sealed internally, because there was no promo material, there was no concept art, it was basically like, hey, we just barely got the ink dry on this deal and we're gonna announce it. It's like, so why are they announcing it? Like, who's gonna get excited about just the possibility of an Ice Age 6 without even being able to see, oh, so that's what it's gonna look like? And they weren't really clear about what studio is gonna be making it, because as we all know, Blue Sky got shut down. But let's talk about Blue Sky. Blue Sky is one of the pioneering animation studios when it comes to 3D animation, because at first there was Pixar. Pixar was the first animation studio to release a animated feature film featuring exclusively 3D, CGI. And then there was DreamWorks, who had basically 2 teams for a while, because they started out with The Prince of Egypt, and then they also had Spirit and Road to El Dorado and Sinbad, not exactly in that order. But then they also had Ants and Shrek. And it's all DreamWorks, and I really wonder how much of the teams between the hand-drawn and the 3D stuff, how much did they interact with each other? And then there was Blue Sky. Blue Sky was basically the 3rd studio to start making fully CGI animated features. And I think that they actually were able to do a lot visually in the Meltdown. Because if you look back at the very first Ice Age, its age shows. It is a pretty rough movie in many respects, but it's still a good movie. Just because its visuals have aged doesn't mean it's no longer good, but it is noticeable. And a lot of the issues that the first Ice Age had with, some of the fur not looking too good and a lot of the lighting being pretty flat, like this movie, Ice Age the Meltdown, happened just a few years later, actually improves in a lot of ways. In fact, I think that the fur in this movie still looks pretty decent for a lot of it. And I think a big part of that is its more angular art style. It's like when you think about animal movies with angular art styles, the big one that comes to mind is Madagascar. But before Madagascar, Blue Sky with Ice Age was already doing that with just some measure of animal characters that have more angular proportions, especially like the tusks. And speaking of tusks, one of the things that I noticed while making this complete animation video is the animators fudge the tusks on mammoths so much. Sometimes you can actually see it. There's some scenes where like Manny and Ellie's tusks are actually clipping through each other. It's very noticeable if you watch for it. But there's a whole bunch of clipping of tusks that happens like sort of off screen, where it's the way they crop the image. It's like there is no way that if you zoomed out that the tusks are doing anything remotely realistic. And I think that that's an interesting trade-off. How do you have these characters that have giant bones sticking out of the front of their faces that are attached to their skull? How do you work with that and still have the characters, emote and be close together and stuff? Like, there's a ton of scenes where Manny and Ellie have their faces really close together. If you look at where their tusks are, it's like, yeah, that doesn't make physical sense. And I think that they probably made the right choice. I think that they just said, look, if the tusks aren't noticeably clipping through geometry most of the time, and it would be clipping through, but you can't see it because it's out of frame, I think that that's probably the right call to make. But there's another part of me that thinks, it would be pretty cool if the entire movie respected tusks the entire time and never did anything that made the tusks clip through stuff and always showed like characters' heads, like Manny and Ellie's heads slightly bonking whenever their tusks hit something. So, I don't know. I think that this early age of 3D animation often struggles with water. And I think that this movie, Ice Age the Meltdown, did a pretty good job with its water, all things considered. Because if you think back to the first Ice Age, where the water, basically the big water scene that you see is when the child's mother is jumping off the waterfall and then leaves him in the care of Manny and Sid, and then she dies as she washes away down the river. Like, that scene, the water looked kind of all right. Not that good, but not incredibly bad. But if you compare that water to all the water here in the Meltdown, there's actually like quite a bit of improvement. It's not nearly as good as what Disney would end up doing in movies like Frozen 2 and Raya and the Last Dragon. Those movies have water that is so good that basically that the water in those movies will always look good. It's practically photorealistic with, cartoony characters in it. But remember, Ice Age, the Meltdown, made a pretty big advancement in water rendering long before those movies. And I think that there's a good story to be told there. There's, a bunch of YouTube channels, especially in like the video game space, who are able to get interviews with game developers and get like really good behind the scenes looks at what they were doing to make the games they were making. I think it'd be cool if there was some equivalent sort of YouTube channel for animated feature films where talk to the guys who actually developed the water tech in Ice Age the Meltdown. How cool of an interview would that be? Especially if you could get like extra behind the scenes footage. Because back in the day, there were, some DVDs with bonus features and had people talking about what they were doing. But basically the gold standard of that was the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The extended edition of those had bonus features that basically told you how they made the entire movie with really good behind the scenes. You basically never get that with animated movies. And it's because so many animated movies, they have this stigma being made for kids, and so all the bonus features are either watered down or just non-existent. Look at the bonus features of the latest Illumination movie. A bunch of it is here's arts and crafts things that you can do at home. It's I don't want that. I want to know how they made this movie. But it is what it is. So thanks for watching. My guess is that this patron will want to see more complete animations of Ellie, so stay tuned for some more of those possibly. Thanks for watching.